Hello and welcome to this special episode of our podcast as we mark Democracy Day, June 12th in Nigeria, a day of profound significance that honors both the annulled 1993 election and also the broader struggle for democratic rule. Today, Nigeria celebrates 26 years of unbroken years of civilian administration, a milestone that deserves recognition in a country once plagued by military coups and you would say authoritarian rule. Yet, as we commemorate this democratic journey, we must also engage in honest reflection. A question: has our democracy fulfilled its promise? For millions of Nigerians, democracy still feels distant, more about elections than empowerment, more about politicians than the people. And in this episode, this special episode, we want to invite listeners to step on the balcony. And this is a leadership metaphor that encourages us to rise above the noise of daily politics and observe the broader patterns, the dynamics, and the undercurrents shaping our national experience. From this elevated view, we will see a country struggling with questions that go beyond policies. Is liberal democracy as practiced today, where a winner-takes-all model, often driven by identity politics, truly serving the need of Nigerians? Or do we need to reimagine a system that fits our context, one that balances representation with stability, diversity with unity, and freedom with responsibility? This episode isn't about offering simple answers, because leadership is not about having all the answers. Rather, it is about creating space for multiple interpretations, engaging the public in difficult but necessary work of collective sense-making. And as we reflect on examples like Singapore under Lee Kuan Yew, who used adaptive leadership to build a hybrid model grounded in his country's specific realities, we need to ask, what might a uniquely Nigerian model of governance look like? And our goal in this episode is not to prescribe, but to provoke thought, to encourage all of us to look again, to listen deeper, and to work together to decide what kind of democracy Nigeria truly needs to thrive. In August 2023, I had the privilege, the opportunity to visit Singapore, a nation just like Nigeria was once dismissed as a fragile post-colonial experience. Walking through its clean streets, witnessing the efficiency of its systems, and observing the discipline and cohesion of its society, I was struck by how far they've come, from third world to first in one generation. It was a magic. It was leadership, vision, and a deep understanding of context. That visit left me in awe, but also filled me with questions. What will it take for Nigeria to craft its own transformation story? Not by copying others, but by courageously charting a course that worked for us. As we mark June 12th, this is the conversation we need to have. And let's consider briefly the Singapore story. Upon separation from Malaysia in 1965, Singapore was left as a tiny multi-ethnic island with a volatile mix of Chinese, Malays, Indians, and others. There had been racial riots in 1964 foiled by communal tensions. Lee Kuan Yew realized that infrastructure and economic growth alone could not prevent national collapse. The deeper challenge was to forge a unified national identity where citizens saw themselves first as Singaporeans, not just as Chinese, Malay, or Indians. Now, the odds were so poor that Western commentators predicted the collapse of the country. But instead of mimicking external ideologies, Lee Kuan Yew stepped back and assessed his environment economically, culturally, historically, and politically. His leadership in Singapore is often cited for its technical brilliance, world-class infrastructure, efficient bureaucracy, economic modernization. But what made his governance transformative was his ability to confront adaptive challenges, not just technical ones. He went on the balcony, like we would say, to see beyond surface level solutions and into the deeper shifts in values, identity, and strategy that Singapore needed to survive and to thrive. This approach holds significant lessons for a nation like Nigeria, grappling with whether Western liberal democracy truly fits our historical, cultural, and social realities. And what did Lee Kuan Yew do? Number one, he identified the adaptive challenges of identity, trust, and cohesion. He understood that Singapore's greatest threat wasn't poverty or lack of infrastructure alone. It was the existential question of identity. How do you turn a polyglot, multi-ethnic, post-colonial society into a coherent nation state? Singapore was a Chinese island in a Malay sea with fragile ties between Chinese, Malays, and Indians, and a recent expulsion from Malaysia that reinforced its vulnerability. The deeper challenge was adaptive, forging a shared national identity, building trust across difference, and maintaining social cohesion in the absence of a shared historical narrative. Similarly, Nigeria's challenge is not just fixing electricity, roads, or oil revenue distribution. It is adaptive at its core, how to build a nation out of more than 250 or so ethnic groups with vastly different religions, colonial experiences, and historical grievances. Like Singapore, Nigeria's future cannot rest only on technical governance. It must be grounded in a national story that speaks to all its people. Second point to make regarding Lee Kuan Yew, he rejected copy and paste democracy. Lee's view of Western models is he boldly rejected the universal applicability of Western liberal democracy. He recognized that systems developed in homogeneous, centuries-old nation states with deeply embedded civic institutions might not transplant well into a fragile post-colonial society. I'm not saying that democracy does not work, but I am saying that in a multiracial, multi-religious society, order and social cohesion must come first, Lee Kuan Yew said. Now, this is also relevant to Nigeria's current debate. The liberal democratic model has produced fierce political competition without strong civic institutions, turning elections into existential ethnic contests and breeding circles of violence, corruption, and elite capture. Rather than accepting democracy as a one-size-fits-all dogma, Nigeria might need to rethink its political architecture in the light of its context, just as Lee Kuan Yew did. And three, he relied on cultural intelligence, harnessing local values. Lee did not see Asian, particularly Confucian values as obstacles to modernization. Rather, he framed them as assets. Respect for authority enabled long-term policy implementation. Emphasis on family and community created a culture of mutual obligation and restraint. Harmony was prioritized over adversarial confrontation. For Nigeria, this raises a provocative question. Are there African political, social, or cultural values, whether the Ubuntu in South Africa, consensus-based decision-making, respect for others that can be institutionalized without being dismissed as undemocratic? Why not Africanize democracy to make it more legitimate and workable, instead of shoehorning in a form that often deepens division rather than healing it? And the fourth thing he did was Lee Kuan Yew created a hybrid governance, a pragmatic model. He didn't imitate, he curated and synthesized. His governance model was pragmatic, hybrid, and highly contextual. British rule of law and civil service structure, Japanese and Korean economic discipline and planning, American entrepreneurship, but without its extreme inequality or polarized politics, all a hybrid. He built a democratic, meritocratic system that could deliver goods efficiently and with integrity. Civil servants were highly paid. It was performance-based and non-partisan, a direct attack on the adaptive challenge of corruption. Let's contrast this with Nigeria, where public office is too often a source of patronage and rent extraction. Could Nigeria reimagine a civil service to emphasize professionalism, merit, and civic nationalism over ethnic loyalty and quota politics? And the fifth thing that he did, he balanced authority and accountability. Lee's model was not open-ended pluralism. It was guided democracy, where freedom was balanced with cohesion. Media and speech were constrained when necessary to prevent ethnic incitement. Political competition was permitted but managed. Public opinion mattered but didn't dictate policy in the short term. Now, some critics call this authoritarian, but in a sense it was adaptive. Lee knew that Singapore's survival required deep trust and long-termism, not constant electioneering. Nigeria might want to consider, can we build a political culture where stability and unity are not sacrificed on the altar of unrestrained pluralism, where dialogue is inclusive, but also bound by a shared commitment to order, competence, and integrity? And the sixth thing that Lee, did in Singapore was he advanced meritocracy and high trust, replacing patronage with performance. He understood that corruption and inefficiency were not just moral failures, but systemic flaws that drained national energy and trust. To change this, he made meritocracy the bedrock of Singapore's governance. Civil servants were chosen through rigorous exams, not ethnic quotas or party loyalty. Ministers were paid well, not to pamper elites, but to insulate them from the temptation of graft. Performance reviews and accountability mechanisms ensured only the competent rose to the top. This is an adaptive leadership insight. Instead of tinkering at the edges, he redefined what legitimacy and authority look like. Not inherited through tribe, charisma, or seniority, but earned through excellence. And the seventh thing that he did, he demanded sacrifice, but led with example. Integrity as a leadership standard, Lee advanced. And one of the most powerful aspects of his leadership was that he demanded discipline and sacrifice, but never asked of citizens what he and his team weren't willing to do themselves. This ethos of leading by personal example became the moral spine of Singapore's governance. While ministers were paid competitive salaries to ensure they could resist corruption, they were also held to the highest standards of public accountability and humility. Their wealth and privileges was not to be flouted, but justified by results. And Lee understood that perception matters in governance. If leaders are seen as indulgent or detached, it undermines the legitimacy of their policies, no matter how technically sound they are. Lee Kuan Yew lived in a modest family home on Oxley Road until his death, in Singapore until his death, declining to move into the state mansions or enjoy excessive perks. He once declared, "I cannot justify asking Singaporeans to accept hardship if I do not do so myself." Now, this was more than symbolism. It created a shared sense of sacrifice, allowing the government to make tough economic and social reforms with public support. People followed because they trusted their leaders were not exempt from the same rules. And these are lessons for Nigeria. So searching questions. Lee Kuan Yew's genius wasn't just technical, it was adaptive leadership. He didn't just build roads and airports, he built a national identity, a governing culture, and a long-term vision, deeply rooted in his society's realities. For Nigeria, the current question is liberal democracy the best model for us? That question should not be feared. It should be welcomed. Adaptive challenges require new frameworks, not borrowed blueprints. And to thrive, Nigeria may need to consider a few things. Forge a homegrown democracy that is culturally legitimate and socially cohesive. Embrace adaptive leadership that builds trust, not just infrastructure. Create institutions that reward competence, not patronage. Focus on shared identity and values, not just mechanical rule books. That's the essence of adaptive leadership for Singapore then, and also will be for Nigeria now. My final thoughts. Adaptive leadership for Nigeria, looking at the Singapore story. Singapore succeeded not because it copied others, but because it understood itself and chose the hard work of adaptive change. Nigeria stands at a similar crossroad. Surface reforms won't fix it. We won't fix a political system riddled with patronage, or a civil service that lacks trust and capacity, or a divided population without a shared national identity. What Nigeria needs is not another imported model. It needs bold, adaptive leadership committed to long-term nation building, grounded in cultural legitimacy, and courageous enough to rethink what democracy and development means within the Nigerian context. And as Lee Kuan Yew said, we must do what is right, not what is fashionable. I hope this has raised thoughts. I hope we've stayed on the balcony enough to ask some relevant questions. And I just thought to put out these thoughts as Nigeria celebrates Democracy Day, 26 years of unbroken civilian rule. If this made sense, subscribe to my channel, share with someone, and see you next time on the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.